All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you happen to be. My name is Christopher Harrison. This is Web Wednesday, the show where I bring on some amazing people to talk about kind of all things web development. And today I'm really excited to be joined by Rachel Weil, who I kind of got to work with a little bit back many years ago when there was a little thing called MVA, Microsoft Virtual Academy, that existed. And I was always really impressed with Rachel's knowledge and her presentation skills. And so I wanted to try and get her on the show. And so here she is, and she's here to talk to us about DevTools in Microsoft Edge. But we'll get to that in a minute here. First up, Rachel, thank you for joining. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me. This is going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. Me too. So I always like to start with kind of the basic question, which is, how did you become Rachel Weil? How did you get into this? How did you find yourself to where you are?
Yeah, man, it's been a long journey, a winding journey. Yeah, I've kind of been all over the place doing, I think started out writing science textbooks. I went to art school, worked in labs for a while, worked as a computer historian. So that was the obvious path to Microsoft and working on Edge browser.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can absolutely see that. Yeah, art school straight into Edge DevTools.
Yeah. No, in terms of web development, I've been kind of a tinkerer on the web since I was maybe 15 or so. I got my first summer job building a website. I won't say what year it was, but 1024 by 768. If those numbers mean anything to you, then you know what era I'm talking about. Yeah. So got started early, just sort of taught myself web development, back in the sort of view source days, and have always kind of been interested in web development. And once I kind of made my way to Microsoft, started getting more interested. And, I just think the web platform is such a great, it's a great place to build and be creative. That's what I always love doing with the web is, whether it's, sort of artwork or interactive installation work. I love how the web is always evolving, and it's so democratic. And so I had a really great opportunity recently to join the Edge DevTools team, where I've been for, I guess, about 2 years. Working on the developer tools, which is great because it's like I have this opportunity to help my former self. I really could have used DevTools back then. It's really great to always kind of be in that mindset of, both a developer and taking me back to when I was 15 and just figuring out how stuff works by kind of breaking it and rebuilding it.
I love that. That's absolutely how I go through life as well, is that same sort of tinkerer. Let me just play around with things. Let me break things and figure it all out. That's fantastic. So you went over there basically right about the time that they rebooted, is if that's a fair way to put it, and started doing Chromium as opposed to an internal engine.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so I think when I joined the team, we were kind of in our insider build phase. We had moved to the Chromium platform, but hadn't kind of fully launched the way we have now. And so, we've made this really cool switch to a sort of open source platform. It's been a really exciting time. I think, the developer tools ship with the browser. So, they're also based on this Chromium platform. And it was a pretty exciting time to join, and just been totally floored by the reception and the excitement around Edge DevTools. So it keeps it really fun.
I love it. I have to say, so I was a long time Chrome user, and I think that this is safe to say, is I would periodically go back to Edge just because I sort of like felt like an obligation, like, okay, I really should be using Edge, and I would go back to Edge, and I would last for about like a week or two, and I would just get so frustrated because I would have like 5 tabs open or something like that, and I'm not somebody who's got 50 tabs that you actually can't like see the icons anymore. Like that's not the kind of person that I was, but I would have like 5, 6 tabs open, and then it would just freeze up, or it would just, crash to desktop and things like that. And so I would just be caught in this cycle, and just always found myself going back to Chrome. But for the insider build, I switched to that relatively early on, and there was one key feature that was missing that sort of kept me from it for about a month or so. I think it might have been like bookmarks, or like it was something like really core like that was missing very early on. But once that was added, I made the switch and literally never looked back. Like from that moment, even when I was paving and setting up a brand new system, I still was not installing Chrome. So I've been on Edge pretty much since that one core feature. I think it was bookmarks was added in. I can't remember what it was, but anyway, yeah. So it's been fantastic.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I guess I'm a little biased since I work on Edge, but I've got it on my Mac now as well. I have it on my personal Windows machine. And it's I think it's cool because it's a little bit of the best of both worlds, where we get a lot of the nice benefits of having a shared platform. So we have that platform support across the board. It's sort of getting rid of this idea of like, oh, as a web developer, I have to go test my website in Chrome, and then I need to go also test it in Edge. The platform support really should be the same. And that's a win for developers. And then where we can differentiate and be different is, in the sort of, for developers, for example, the developer experience in DevTools, or, the user experience in the sort of, Edge browser all up. And so we have our own perspective on things. I think on the DevTools team, we have our own perspective on what developer productivity looks like, and how we want to make the DevTools easy to use. But we still have that great sort of core of consistent platform support. And so I think that's nice to have a little bit of like, difference in the market, but also have some similarity where it counts and where it's important.
I agree completely. And as long as we don't start bringing back like, Blink and Marquee tags, I think we're good.
Oh, no. All right. Well, I guess I'm not going to show that spec.
Oh, too funny. All right, so I have a little bit of a confession to make, and I'm sure that this is a confession that many other developers, and probably a fair portion of the audience would make as well, is I'm a console log debugger. It's been ingrained in me pretty much since I first started doing web dev, especially because I just didn't have the tools, and sadly I've never come around out of that. So let's sort of start with this question: is what would you say to somebody like myself, to a console log debugger, why we should start using the debug tools inside of Edge?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, I want to say, to all the console loggers out there, you are valid. If you want to use console log to debug your website, that's great. You go ahead and keep doing that. There are tools in DevTools that, you can set breakpoints. You can, set watches. I'm going to do a demo here in a minute. Well, actually, do you want to just open up DevTools now, and we can
let's just
start jumping in? All right.
Sure.
That was the wrong button. There we go. So first of all, you're valid if you want to use console. There are other tools. We should take a look at those. But I think, to your point, one thing I want to acknowledge is that I think one of the biggest challenges being a web developer is that the web is always changing. And it's a good thing about the web, right? The good thing is that it's always changing. The bad thing is it's always changing. And so it is hard to keep up with, all of the new features, everything you need to support. The dev tools are here to evolve with the platform and help you debug new features and new capabilities. But that means the tools are also complex. And so, when I was working as a freelance web developer, I was using DevTools, and I was only using Elements in console for years. It's all I knew how to do. And it worked and it was what I needed. And that's okay. I think that's an okay way to use DevTools. So I'm definitely not here to say, oh, console log, that's, that's not the right way. The right way is the way that makes you productive. But that being said, I think, as I joined the DevTools team, what became really interesting to me was like, how do we actually make these other tools and this other functionality easier to use, easier to understand, and make sure that people, when they open up DevTools, they feel confident in the tool. They know how to find these specialty, tools and things like that. So maybe I could talk a little bit about that, and then we can start jumping into some feature demos. Sound good?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
So first of all, I just opened up DevTools. I pressed F12 on the browser and have popped this up. Now you see here I have a welcome tab. Very, very similar experience what you'd see in VS Code or Visual Studio. Of course, you can turn it off if you want. But now that we've moved to the Chromium platform, we're actually releasing new versions every 4 weeks, and our team is busy adding new features. It's really quite cool to see this changelog. So if you're the kind of person who, you want to stay up to date with the latest features, this is a great way to do that. You can actually click these links and they will take you directly to documentation about the new features. So this is a great example. This is a really cool one, actually, a new tool that we released that allows you to debug memory leaks when you have, let's say, an element that's detached, but you have some JavaScript that's still referencing it. Those kind of memory leaks have typically been pretty hard to debug. We have a tool that's specialized just for that. It's great. Not everyone needs it, but for those folks that do, it's a really specialized tool. And so by kind of keeping that, keeping tabs on this sort of welcome tab or welcome tool, you can keep up to date with all the new features that we're working on. We've also got some great docs for beginners and just links out to our documentation. So this is kind of a nice homepage, especially if you're getting started with the DevTools. I think, another thing I want to kind of talk about is just sort of navigating the DevTools. I think that's been a sticking point, honestly, for a lot of folks who use the DevTools. And I was one of those people. It's like, I don't know what all those buttons do. I better not click them,
I know what console does.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just going to pull up here. And admittedly, it's a complex tool. There's a lot of different panels and different things going on like this. But here, kind of in this bottom panel, I've got, here is where I like to keep console, elements, sources, network. So these are kind of the main tools that people end up using. Elements to kind of inspect different things on the page. Sources, if you're wanting to look at your source code or you're wanting to set breakpoints. Network to monitor network activity. Console, I think we've spoken to console. I think we know what console does. But what a lot of folks didn't realize is there are actually over 30 different tools you can open up in DevTools, and we've recently added this little plus button here to make it really easy to find those. And you can kind of add them to this top menu or the bottom, and you can move things around. But did you know that all these things were here?
I did not know.
Yeah, right. So there are all these specialized tools. Now, the ones I have open are kind of just the ones that may be opened by default. But there are a lot of additional ones that you can add. And if you use them frequently, open them up and keep them open, and they'll be there the next time you open up DevTools. So, for example, here's a little known one, coverage. This one will actually measure, I think I'll have to refresh the page, but this will actually tell you code coverage for JavaScript and CSS based on the actual interaction that you've had with this page in this session. So you can see here, it's like, oh, I have 70% of my JavaScript in this particular file didn't actually run in this particular page load. And when I've clicked it here, it's actually brought this up and showing me the sort of color coding of saying hey, this code didn't actually run. Now, it could be dead code, or it could be just code that hasn't run yet because I haven't clicked a button or something that will cause it to run. But things like this could be super helpful for someone. Rendering is another really cool one that I feel like I wish more people knew about. You can do things like emulate different color modes, emulate vision deficiency. So if you want to see how your website will look like to someone who has certain kinds of color blindness, you can see I've set this, and now the page is actually emulating that form of color blindness. Pretty cool, huh?
That's okay. So, what's funny is and I want to come back to it real quick because I had noticed Lighthouse in there, and I definitely want to come back to Lighthouse because accessibility is a little bit of a thing for me. But that's under rendering.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and there are actually all sorts of cool functions in here. There's another one. I don't want to turn it on because it could be sort of flashing lights and, not everyone on the stream may want to see that. But you can turn that on to show like different parts of the page that are being painted to the screen. Here's a cool one, frame rendering stats. So you can see, I think it might be a little bit delayed just because of the stream. It's a little bit laggy, but as I scroll through the page, you can actually see I'm getting like different results on my frame rate or, different kind of levels on GPU usage and things like that. So there's so many cool things just sort of tucked away into DevTools. It can be hard to find them all, but hopefully with this plus menu, these kind of tools are more readily visible. Actually, let me go back to rendering and turn off this FPS thing just so we get it out of the way.
And reset the vision.
Oh yes, thank you.
You're welcome. And so on that vision, I just want to pontificate here for just like 10 seconds that because one of the big things I think when it comes to accessibility that really helps developers is being able to see it as somebody who sees it or interacts with it differently than we do or than they do. That I know for me, once I heard a screen reader, that instantly changed the way that I write my HTML and put together my links and so forth, because now I actually got to have that experience. So the fact that that's built right in, that I can now go in and I can say, hey, I'm going to see this as somebody who's colorblind. That's going to make a huge difference for developers and how pages are created. I love that.
Well, since you mentioned accessibility, I'm gonna actually, maybe I'll show some accessibility features here in a moment, because we've actually got quite a few new features that are great. Even if you are maybe not an expert in accessibility or you don't know what to be looking for, we have some great new tools that actually help give some really practical guidance. Have you seen this one, by the way, 3D View?
No.
This is a way to visually explore your like z-index values in CSS. You can also kind of switch over to a DOM view. But this is pretty cool for understanding like why certain things are positioned the way they are. You get some pretty cool like 3D tools and like zoom and panning and stuff like that, which it's pretty cool. And it can actually be quite helpful in understanding like why things are showing up the way that they are.
So that's showing me all of my CSS layers.
So there are a couple different views. There's the z-index view, the DOM view, and then composited layers. And so they're kind of different. Z-index would be what's set in your CSS z-index value versus like the DOM, which is just sort of like how it's showing on the page. If you ever wanted to, it's really cool too, all these different like textures and, you can kind of do the heat map style or, if you ever wanted to see what the back of your website looks like, just curious, you want to see what that looks like. So yeah, I know we could talk for probably hours just about all the different features and tabs in DevTools, but this is mostly to say, there's a lot. There's a lot of little niche tools. And so if you want to feel brave and try something outside of, console and elements, go explore. And I think another like cool feature, if you're like, I don't know what this does, or I don't know, I'll show you a cool tip, something that's kind of new. You can access this from the help menu, or there's also a keyboard shortcut for it, Control-Shift-H. We actually have tooltips. It's kind of like a help mode built right into DevTools now.
Oh, cool.
And so as you mouse over different panes, they will actually tell you what the functionality of that. I apologize. I think because of the stream, I'm a little bit lagged right now. So you might be seeing it a couple seconds after I do. But yeah, you can actually even change panels. and you'll see the tooltip actually updates. And so here I can see what console does, and I can even, yeah, right. I can even go and some of these have links out to documentation as well. So I can see like these learn more links. I can go click that, open up the documentation, and learn more about a tool. So this is really helpful if you're working in a tool that you haven't really used before, and then you can just exit out of it with Escape or Control-Shift-H.
That's really cool. And, you know, there's a question that I think is sort of related to this, and I think I know what the answer is, but I'm going to ask it anyway, which is, do you have a list of enhancements for the DevTools since IE 11?
Wow. No, I don't think there is a comprehensive, like a comparison of features. Yeah. No. You want to collaborate on something?
Something tells me that there'd be a very long list.
Yeah, it's true. But I mean, I think if you do have questions, like we do have really extensive docs. We have tutorials, like walkthroughs. Really, even if you're just getting started with web development, don't feel like you're going to be left behind. There's a lot of great sort of introductory content there. But yeah, I don't think we have a specific like side-by-side comparison. That's a good one, though.
Totally fair. And then another question, which, you know, sort of gets into maybe a little bit of debugging. And this is from Perkins from Twitch, which is, how does TDD relate with debugging in this context?
In this context, you know, I kind of think of DevTools as being in a certain part of my workflow personally that might be kind of after. If you're doing test-driven development, you know, I always think of when I open DevTools, it's at a later stage in development. But one thing that might be interesting for folks who are kind of looking to integrate this experience more into the development process is actually to check out something else that we have that our team is working on, which is actually a DevTools extension for VS Code. And so this, and also like getting back to your point about setting breakpoints and all of that, if you're really familiar with that workflow in VS Code, this is a really cool way to sort of integrate your existing VS Code workflow with the DevTools. And so this is just an extension you can pick up from the extensions marketplace. It's a Microsoft Edge tools for VS Code. And you know, I've got a live server running right now, and I can actually just attach to that. And whoops, wrong window. And in a second here, when my computer catches up, we'll actually see the DevTools popping up with a, there we go, with a view of my app. Are you blown away? I heard a gasp.
I have wanted this for quite a while. I have wanted the ability to see like my browser window and everything inside of VS Code for the longest time now.
All right, can I continue to blow your mind?
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, well, you get all the cool stuff that you get with, you know, DevTools, like being able to inspect elements and things like that. You can actually interact with this page. Pretty cool. So it is like a real, it's not like a picture or a screenshot. It is like interactive, fully interactive. And I can also go in here. I've got my CSS open. I could go in here and use some of the, you know, let's say, color picking tool, for example. And I don't have autosave turned on in VS Code, but if I did, that would, you know, I've got a reload server running, so you can see it actually updated that live on the page. It would be really, really live if I had autosave turned on, but I don't trust myself with autosave, so we do it the old-fashioned way. So yeah, this is, you get this great sort of live editing experience. And then another cool thing that you can do is, this is actually also integrated with the kind of debugging workflow. And so I've got this set up here again. where I am going to, I've launched the debugger, and I can go ahead and bring that back into VS Code. And from this point, I can actually do things now. CSS might not be the best one. Let me find a JavaScript file here. I can actually go and set breakpoints in my JavaScript file and actually see them break on the live update in DevTools. So let me see if I can show you what I'm talking about. So let's say I want to maybe break here where, when I update a task, I want to set a breakpoint here. And I should be able to now, when I add a task and then I try to close it out, do you see that? It actually stopped on this breakpoint.
No, it didn't.
It did. It did.
That is just too cool.
Not only that, but here in my debug console in VS Code, I actually have the console logs that I wrote in my page. And so now I can do all this cool stuff. I can step through, step over, whatever. I can restart. And when I continue this session, what should happen is that tasks should go away because I've, that was the part where I had the breakpoint on. So yes, task went away, and look, it added a new, it added this console line because I had, had that in my app. What are you thinking?
I'm speechless. This is amazing. I've wanted this for the longest time. I had no idea that was there. That's yeah. So
definitely recommend install this in VS Code. I will show again. You just go to the extensions marketplace. It's called Microsoft Edge Tools for VS Code. This whole project is on GitHub as well, so you can. If you want to check out the code base, if you want to contribute, if you have feature ideas, it's still relatively new, and I know the team is super open to feedback and things like that. Yeah, it's pretty cool, right?
That's amazing. That is wonderful. Related to that, and this is from Microsoft Learn, Kepboy asked the question, you mentioned you could set breakpoints on JavaScript. Is there support for Blazor?
Oh, that is a good question. I think that, you mean for the VS Code extension?
Either the VS Code extension or in Edge.
Yeah, I think it's something our team is really looking to improve on. I think is some of those integrations. I think definitely the VS Code extension, I'm fairly certain, doesn't have a lot of support for kind of the third-party stuff. It's still quite new and in development, but it is something that's really important to our team. We want to make sure that these experiences are good for folks working in Blazor. Also looking at are there other places where people might want to integrate this sort of DevTools workflow into their IDEs. So it's a great question. I don't have chat pulled up right now, but I can absolutely either follow up with folks afterwards. I'm on Twitter as well, so if folks want to find me there, I'm happy to continue conversations and hear more about what sort of use cases folks are interested in.
Okay, all right. I will make sure that I'll put your Twitter handle into that chat window.
Cool.
So let's sort of circle back a little bit and talk about accessibility. So I know that Lighthouse is built in. So let's actually start here. For anybody who's not familiar, what's Lighthouse, and then in turn, what accessibility tools are available inside of Edge?
Yep. Great question. So Lighthouse is indeed built into the DevTools. This is sort of like an auditing tool that was built by Google. And it generates reports based on a couple different categories, things like performance, SEO, and so I'm not going to do it here because it might take a while. Especially, I can feel my computer really struggling with the stream. But yeah, so it'll actually generate a report, and it gives you kind of a score. It'll tell you you got a 95 or you got a 15 or whatever. And so this is really great for helping you kind of audit a site, maybe at kind of toward the end of the development cycle and understand places where you can improve. But actually, I'd like to show you another tool that we have in DevTools that I think achieves a lot of these same sort of goals, but in kind of a slightly different way. Again, it's sort of, back to what we were talking about before of sort of integrating it more into your development experience. So, yeah, that is actually the issues panel. And so this is really cool. This is a new feature. Essentially, the issues panel sort of was born out of this idea that the console can be a very crowded place, especially sometimes you get like these warnings and deprecation notices, and like you're just trying to find that console log that you put into your app.
Here. Yes.
Yeah. I think there was also this kind of desire to help developers with actionable, like human readable, actionable advice on improving their site. And so one thing that we've done in Edge DevTools is we've integrated WebHint, which is kind of an open source engine that collects best practices from places like Axe, MDN, and then surfaces them into DevTools. What's cool about this is you can see it's already rendered here. It's actually running continuously on the page. So instead of this concept of having to like generate a report kind of at the end of the development cycle, you can just have this open and kind of have it continually analyzing your page. There are a couple of categories: accessibility, Compat. This is a really cool one. I think a lot of people don't necessarily expect this one. We actually give you advice when you've written some code that may not be supported in Firefox or Safari. So I know like cross-browser testing is a huge pain point. It can be hard to know like, oh, can I use open in a tab? You have MDN open in a tab. We wanted to kind of eliminate that struggle and just kind of collect all these best practices in one place and say, hey, you wrote some code that actually doesn't work in Firefox. It actually doesn't work in Safari. Not only do we tell you in plain language what the issue is, but when you expand this, you actually see the line of code that generated this error. You are linked to docs. You can go check MDN and see why they say you should do it this way or shouldn't do it this way. And you can actually open this up in the DevTools. You can open in elements or sources and go see where exactly in your code base did this occur. You can see here, I've even got these sort of squiggly underlines, just like you would have in VS Code in the elements panel, telling you like, hey, there's something wrong with this tag, right? And that could be a compat issue. That could be, I know you asked about accessibility. Look at all these things we can improve in Bing. I don't know if you know anybody who works in Bing. Maybe we should go find someone. But there's some ways that they could improve the accessibility of that page. And again, clicking on this, we can see exactly, like there's an image that doesn't have alt text. We can go open that up in Elements. Now it's possible, we may or may not want to fix that, but we're actually given explicit instructions of like, hey, this doesn't have this. Here's how you can fix it. Here's where we can go learn more. Or you can just open it up directly in DevTools and go see, what was it? Or go open it in sources. Or if it's a network request, go open that network request and see what was wrong with it. So this is a pretty cool feature. It's a nice way to keep some of that clutter out of console and give you this real-time feedback on things like security best practices, performance best practices, accessibility. And of course, I think the Compat is huge. That is one thing that you won't find in Lighthouse, since they're it is a very Chrome oriented tool. And so it is very tailored to Chrome. But this is great if you're developing apps that need to kind of run everywhere. And you want a sort of quick check to see, hey, did you use, whether it's like prefixed CSS or whatever, did you use something that doesn't have sort of a wide range of support?
I love that. It's funny. We didn't know we had it so good when it was just IE and Netscape, and those were the only two browsers that we ever had to worry about. Like we didn't know we had it so good back then. I also really love the fact that on all of those issues, like not only as you highlighted, does it take you straight to the code and everything else, but I love the resources that are provided, and especially like the why resources, which again, sort of like, yeah, since you're there, going back to that accessibility, a lot of people don't necessarily know why those types of things are important, like why you shouldn't use, like div buttons and so forth. So the fact that you've got the links links to that information is just, it's so important. It's so wonderful, just like educating people as they go through that. That's really cool.
And I totally agree. I feel like one of the big goals of DevTools should be to help educate developers and keep developers, up to speed with all the new platform capabilities and all the new, best practices and recommendations. I think the cool thing about this issues panel, you'll see a lot of the feedback here is recommended from WebHint, and WebHint is a project that started at Microsoft but has since been open source as part of the OpenJS Foundation. And it's anyone can contribute a hint or a recommendation. Obviously we'll get reviewed and things like that, but we try to pull from these sort of industry leading open source sort of sources of truth. We're not the arbiters on what the right way to build the web is. The web is the right, the web knows. And so we kind of leverage all of these best practices, but they're not, our specific opinion as Microsoft on how you should build apps. And so I love that. I love that developers can be involved in actually shaping what this feedback is and how it evolves over time.
I agree completely, and it's still something I feel like we have to remind everybody is that, like, this is not your parents' Microsoft. That yes, this is open source. Yes, this is community.
Yep.
So over on Twitch, Come Stoke asked the question: does the accessibility panel complement or negate the need for the Wave extension?
The Wave extension. I don't think I'm familiar enough with that extension to answer that question.
Neither am I. I was just sort of like, Wave extension. I know I'm supposed to know this, but
I will say, granted, I don't know what this extension is, so my answer might be wrong. But we do for if folks are asking about this in the issues panel, the accessibility feedback. We get our source for accessibility feedback is Axe, Axe Core. And I know a lot of the extensions out there, there's an Axe extension. Lighthouse also uses Axe. It is sort of the industry standard, resource for accessibility analysis. And so I suspect if this extension is accessibility related, it may also be using Axe under the covers. And so in that case, there may be quite a bit of overlap, if not a lot of overlap. I will say too that in addition to this WebHint experience we have in the DevTools, there's also a VS Code extension. So if you want this feedback in real time, static analysis on your code, just like a linter, basically while you're writing, you start typing in an image and it goes, you forgot your ARIA tag. You can also go and get that WebHint VS Code extension. And that's kind of a nice way that, we're thinking a lot about how VS Code and DevTools work together. And that's another really nice one.
I love that. I love that integration. Because VS Code is one of the best things we've ever built at Microsoft.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. And in my real quick 30 seconds of research, it's a browser extension apparently for Chrome and Firefox that will generate accessibility scores and things like that. So yeah, so it sounds like that's all very similar.
Well, while we're on the topic of using the DevTools to learn, I thought I would show something else cool. If we're good to move on to another topic, I can't believe we're almost out of time. We could go for hours. Please come have me back.
I will, absolutely.
So in the spirit of learning, I thought we might go to the Learn website, the Microsoft Learn website. One, because it's a good segue, but also because I see there's some interesting layouts here. And I want to talk a little bit about debugging layouts. So one big pain point, I think, with developers debugging layouts has been these sort of layout paradigms like Grid and Flexbox. And I was really excited to have worked on bringing Grid and Flexbox tooling to DevTools, not just in Edge, but actually we collaborated with folks on the Chrome DevTools team, built all of this functionality together. We were having cross-team meetings and shared docs and things to really make sure we were building a really robust solution. And of course, it's always better when we put lots of heads together. And I think it's really borne out in this feature. So I want to show some of the cool kind of layout debugging functionality we have. So just I did a little research before this started, and I found, we've got grid and flexbox layouts on the Learn page, which is pretty cool. I found this sort of grid, this grid of cards, and you'll notice here in the Elements tool, when I hover over this, I can start to see the little gaps between the grid items. And there's also this sort of grid button here, which I can click, and that turns on this sort of persistent grid overlay, which is really cool.
Okay, that's cool.
There is a layout tab. So where you normally have styles, you can go over to layout. And you get a lot of configurability options here for both looking at grid and flexbox. I have extend grid lines turned on because I really like to see, for example, how they might line up with other things on the page. Another cool thing you can do is actually turn on the sizes. And so, for example, I can see what size different things are being rendered at, like both their authored sizes and their computed sizes, which is super helpful when you're debugging grid. And here I can go check boxes, turn these grid overlays on and off. I can also change the color if I don't really like that red on the overlay. If I want something a little more subdued, I could make it gray or whatever. And you get all these same cool options with Flexbox as well. Not to mention you can kind of go find those back in Elements. So this is super, super helpful. Grid and Flexbox have always been pretty challenging layout paradigms. They do have a lot of different properties and sort of fiddly parts. But what I think is super cool in terms of learning, not only debugging grid, but actually learning how grid works through DevTools. If we go back to the styles pane, I still have this grid container selected. And you notice there's a little icon here next to display grid. And when I click this, it actually pops over this sort of visual grid editor. And this is such a game changer because all these different properties like align content, align items, I always get those mixed up. I can actually just go and trial some of these and see when I clicked justify items, it actually changed the spacing on that. Oh, it moved it. It's actually updating in real time the layout paradigms. For anyone who's ever tried to debug grid and Flexbox layouts, you know how much time you can spend trying to remember all these property names. And you see as I'm clicking these different buttons, it's actually changing, it's showing me the CSS. And so I am not only playing with it, but I'm actually seeing the code that it generates. So it's super, super helpful in just sort of getting your head around what all of these properties mean. Not to mention that when you mouse over things like grid column gap or row gap, you're seeing those actually highlighted on the page. And so it just starts to make it click in your mind. You're like, oh, that's what a row gap is. It's that space between the track above and the track below, combined with this visual editor is just super, super handy.
Okay, so I have to say, I'm a Bootstrap fan. Don't at me. The reason that I use Bootstrap is because I trying to lay things out in CSS is a challenge. That CSS is awesome mug. That speaks to my soul. And that's always the struggle that I wind up running into. Having this, and it was somebody else that, or you had said that it's a game changer, and there was somebody in Twitch that said it's like a WYSIWYG editor for Flex. That's now it. And so now I can just go in and I can just play around and go, oh, okay, this is now the CSS that I'm going to need to lay things out the way that I want. Yeah. Copy paste back into my editor, and away I go. This is amazing. This is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I was showing grid before. It also works for Flexbox. So if you want to keep using Bootstrap and you want to say oh, what's that flex direction thing? What's going to happen? Oh, yeah. sometimes you change a flex direction for mobile layouts. You can see I've been playing with the header here. It's actually changing it, between row and column, playing with some of these alignment properties. Oh, look, now it's centered. This is such a huge, huge help. And I heard from someone who I met kind of randomly, who is a web developer, and she said, "Oh, you worked on that? That is." We at my company, we're actually able to remove dependencies on libraries because now our developers can go and debug the real sort of native layout features so much more easily. And I love stories like that where people can cut out Bootstrap, where people can, I like Bootstrap, nothing against it. But if you have a dependency where it's just like the only reason you have it is because like it just abstracts away things that are kind of complicated. And you have this tool now, though, that can help you both reason about it and also learn it better. I think that is just huge.
That's amazing.
Yeah, we've actually got a couple of these little visual editors that I think aren't really well known. I'll go back to this one. This is my to-do app from earlier, just because I think it's a little less cluttered for maybe some of the other things I'll show. We have a couple of visual editors. You'll see these little icons in the DevTools, and many of these are clickable. So, for example, color swatches are typically clickable. I can go change a color. I can go change the opacity of a color if I want to make it red, but I want to kind of get halftone or whatever. That's something you can edit visually, as well as like, here's one I think is pretty cool. This is box shadow, which has a sort of strange syntax.
No.
It's like 11 pixels, 11 pixels, 11 pixels, and you're like, what does that mean? But here you have these sort of visual tools where you can like add blur, or add the spread, or change the angle. And it's just like, it's cool, and you get to see how the code is changing live, and it really helps cement for you like, oh, that's what these numbers mean. Of course, you can go in, and I like to use arrow keys to go, max things out, or go up and down, and that's a really helpful tip as well. For to kind of tweak some of these things is super helpful.
No.
Here's another cool one. This is an experimental feature, so I'm going to go flip it on. I just open up settings in DevTools through this little gear icon, and there's lots of experimental features, the things that are coming. This is a good place to kind of snoop around. If you wanted to, put DevTools in a different language, we have many different language support. We've had this for, I think, since we launched pretty much, which is really cool. Again, those themes, we've got new theme support that's unique to Edge DevTools. So, many of the popular VSCode themes like Marquee, or, if you want to do Solarized Dark, which is one I tend to use quite a bit, you can have your DevTools match VSCode, which is pretty cool. But I got distracted here. I want to go back to experiments, and I'm going to turn on, there's so many experiments here. There's so much cool stuff, but enable font editor within the styles pane. And as you might imagine, this is going to give you that same sort of visual editing tooling and elements, but instead of, these color swatches and things like that, you now have a little clickable menu for playing with your typography, which is really cool. You can go in here and, increase the size. Well, that's too big. You can go play with some of the CSS properties, also fallbacks, which is really cool. Not just some of the actual font names, but some of the generic families. So, like system UI is one that a lot of people use if they want, their page to kind of match whatever, system the user has. So yeah, just another kind of cool visual tool. And then you get to see, how that impacts your source. So it's great. It really helps solidify that connection between like, what does it look like? What do I want to happen? And what does the code actually look like? It's sort of being able to triangulate those is really, really cool.
I'm just speechless.
I love it. That's perfect. That's just the reaction I want.
That is so cool. We've got like about 10 minutes left here. we're going to have you back on.
Okay, yeah.
And so at some point, I definitely do want to get into a little bit more of like the deeper dive debugging on things like network and so forth, which I think is certainly certainly important. But this has been brilliant of just like, really cool things. So like, I just want to keep going down that path. Like, what's something else that you really love in there that people typically don't know about?
Yeah. Before we move on, I got to refresh the page because that big thing was just,
Yeah.
it was a problem for me. Yeah. So, like I mentioned, I did say we release every 4 weeks. That's our stable release that ships about every 4 weeks. But we have a Canary version of the browser. I think I'm in Dev today, which is our weekly build. But we have a Canary build, which is our daily build. And so if you really want to be on the cutting edge and see things like the second they're released, that's a good download to have. It is actually a separate download, a separate binary. Just I think Chrome and Firefox have similar things. I think maybe Safari too. So we are, literally every day working on new features, iterating on things. We do really listen to user feedback. Sometimes we get things wrong. Sometimes I get things wrong and we go and fix them. And it's great because we have a daily build, so we can do that really quickly. We do have a feature that is pretty new. It's in Canary. It might have hit Dev. Let me see. I'm going to go back to Bing. Yeah, so we're trying out this new functionality in the console for our console loggers, which is on some of these kind of messages. We actually have this little looking glass icon, and it's really simple. All it does is open up a web search with the error message, but it's actually really handy. Copying things out of console actually can sometimes be kind of challenging. You'll click on the console message and it'll expand it or collapse it, or you can't seem to copy it. And so this is just a really quick, convenient way to look up an error and understand why did I get this error? And of course, the first hit is telling me why this API is changing or whatever. So this isn't available on every console message, but it's great. Just for I want to say beginners, but I'm no, I'm not a beginner, and I look things up constantly. So it's really not a feature just for beginners. I think it's a feature for us all.
Normalize looking up errors on Stack Overflow.
Yeah, exactly.
We all do it.
Yeah. So I think a great place if you're looking for little tidbits or things, kind of new functionality. The place I was in before in settings, the experiments pane, is a really cool place to kind of try things out. Now the things here may not be finished or they might be buggy, and I think you get sort of a warning hey, this could be unstable. So just, if it seems weird, just turn it off and you'll get back to your regular experience. But there's some really cool things. Source order viewer is a new feature for actually showing you kind of these overlays on the page to show you how the elements on a page might be accessed, the order that they would be accessed in for a screen reader, keyboard, nav. We have, the font editor tool, which I showed earlier as an experiment. Network console, which is sort of this kind of Postman-esque sort of networking, networking debugging experience. Detached elements, which I showed earlier. VSCode, there's a bunch of cool stuff in here. Keyboard shortcut editor. Let's look at that. That's pretty cool. So this is in a very experimental section, although I don't know how very experimental it is. But when you enable that experiment, you now have the ability to customize any shortcut in the DevTools. And of course, they're the default shortcuts, but if you use VS Code a lot, like I do, you can actually have all of your shortcuts match VS Code, which is pretty cool.
One of my biggest peeves is when shortcut keys change, and it's one of the things that really drives me up a wall with regards to like the web products versus the desktop products with Office. And I love you Office people, I do, but they change the shortcut keys to do things, and that just throws me for a loop. And so like I want to just almost treat everything wherever I am like VS Code, and so the fact that I can now just do that inside of Edge as well is fantastic. Yeah. Like somebody's probably listening going, that seems like a silly thing. Like for those of us who use shortcut keys, this is a big thing. That's a huge thing.
Yep. And you will see that most of them are kind of already the same, which is great. There are a couple small differences. And that being said, if you want to go in and make up your own keyboard shortcut, or you're into the whole mechanical keyboard, custom, ortholinear, got my special shortcut keys for everything. However you want to set up your workflow, you can go and edit these. I think you literally just press the key, and there you've overwritten your shortcut. And I believe also if you choose one that's already taken, it will let you know, here you go. It's saying this shortcut is already in use, so maybe pick something else. So that's pretty convenient. It's really easy, and of course you can just save it in here and restore your defaults if you screw things up and you want to get back to the way things were.
That is just beyond cool. So I'll get you out on this, which is like, how would somebody, actually two questions. Number one is, how would somebody learn more then about the DevTools and what's possible inside of there? And then number two is, if somebody does have feedback, where should they go to provide it?
Yep, I can answer both of those questions. So in terms of learning more about DevTools, the docs are obviously a great place. If you use the DevTools and you keep that welcome tab open, the default is that it opens up actually after every new version update. And so those are typically the times where we have new features. This is also where we have a lot of great, links off to documentation and things like that. So I usually do keep this open. I mean, I kind of know what updates are coming since I work on the product, but it is cool to see, especially I tend to have I have Canary and I have a dev and I have a beta and I have a stable. And so sometimes it's cool to open up the welcome tab and go, oh yeah, this features in this version or whatever. I actually use it all the time. So yeah, I think the docs are a great way. We're also on Twitter at Edge DevTools. We do try to keep on top of that. I've also got my personal Twitter, which people are welcome to reach out to. But in terms of product feedback, we actually have a feedback icon right here. So you can actually, if you ever run into an issue, you have a problem with something, you feel like there's a bug, there's a really easy way to send feedback. You don't need to bother, making a GitHub issue or going to CRBuck. You can, the Chromium code base does have its CRBug where they do issue tracking and things like that. It is a little bit complicated to set up because you have to be a member of that Google group, I think, or you have to sort of sign up and register. So if you don't want to go through that and you want to just directly reach the team, you can just hit that feedback icon. You can tell us what's happening. You don't have to include your email address, but if you do, we can follow up if you have questions. It is real humans who read them. I read them. People have definitely asked that, oh, I wasn't expecting a human to respond. Yeah, it's real people. You can add attachments, screenshots and things like that. So that's great. We really do. We really do appreciate that feedback. And these are dev tools for you, for developers. And so something's not working right, if there's a workflow that's blocked or something you wish you had, or you just think a feature is great and you want to let us know, that feedback icon is probably the best way to get that to us.
Beautiful. I love it. Rachel, this has been fantastic. Like honestly,
So fun.
I've had my mind blown multiple times through this, and that's not something that I mean, it happens from time to time, but not very often. This was spectacular. I learned so much about the DevTools. I'm gonna start using those. I'm gonna start playing around with like all the grid stuff. I'm gonna start playing around with the VS Code extension. So yeah. Thank you so very much for coming on. We will find an opportunity to get you back on and start digging in, like to a little bit more, specifics and things like that. But in the meantime, Rachel, thank you so much for coming on.
Yep, absolutely. It's been so much fun.
We need to do this again.
All right, I'll be back.
And to everybody else, thank you for tuning in. That was Web Wednesday. We're here every week talking about all sorts of cool web things. So thanks.